Bom dia, bonjour, hello a todos. Espero que você não foi muito cansados com o primeiro curso, que fizemos uma grande viagem, não é? No tempo e também no espaço, com muita gente. Hoje vai ser muito mais tranquilo. Então eu vou falar inglês. Today it will be much more easy for you. We will stay at the same place in Paris. We will see only one person, Poincaré. And it will be short in time because it will be between 1885 and 1889. So more or less 4 or 5 years, no more. So very much more easy. So today, as I told you, we will be much more quiet. We will be with one guy, Henri Poincaré. And he will show us, we will see three things, in fact, in this course. Problem of triangulations. We will see the Poincaré-Hopf theorem. Maybe some of you know already Poincaré-Hopf theorem, and also Poincaré duality. Okay. In fact, we will see these elements in a viewpoint which will be useful for later on characteristic classes. The course starts in 1887 now with the construction of Eiffel Tower. I think everybody knows Eiffel Tower. And I show you Eiffel Tower because, in fact, it's a good example of triangulated. You see, there is a triangulation of this Eiffel Tower with triangles. So it's a very good example of polyhedra, which is a union of here it's in a 3 dimension, we have only triangles, but it can be more, okay? What is a triangulation? In fact, first of all, what is a simplex? A simplex, I think everybody. Simplex of dimension 1 is just a segment, dimension 0 is a point. A triangle is a simplex of dimension 2, etc., with tetrahedra, etc. Okay, and a finite simplicial complex is a collection of simplexes such that each face of a simplex is also in this simplicial complex element of the simplicial complex. And if you have two elements, then intersection is either empty if they are far from, or if they are joined, the intersection is a common face of sigma and sigma prime. The union of simplexes in a compact is a compact subspace in some Euclidean space, which is a geometric realization of the simplicial complex. Here for the Eiffel Tower is the realization of a simplicial complex, which is a union of all these vertices, segments, and triangles, okay? And we say that a topological space is triangulable if there exists a simplicial complex, K, and homeomorphism of the realization to X. For example, here you have two polyhedra, which are triangulations of the sphere, but you know more. You know there are at least 5 that we have seen on the first course, polyhedra, such that we have a homeomorphism of this polyhedra to the sphere. And this polyhedra can be, and this is the work of Francesco Maurolico that we have seen in the first course, okay, can be realized as a planar representation, but in that case, you have to take care of the fact that two simplexes, for example, here A and A, should be glued together respecting the orientation, okay? This gives you the cube. Okay, so you can do that, and Francesco Maurolico, he was amazed by doing that for all polyhedra that we have seen at the first course, the Platonic polyhedra. Here you have triangulations of the torus and the pinched torus. The torus and also the pinched torus will be used a lot in this course, so it's good to know what is the triangulation of the pinched torus. For the torus, you know very well that if you glue all these two sides ABC with ABC, that gives you a cylinder, and if you glue together CFED, DEF together, respecting orientation, you obtain the torus. For the pinched torus, you have A, B, C that you glue together, and you obtain something like a sausage. And then gluing alpha and alpha, the point together, gives you now a croissant. Okay, so good appetite. The Poincaré, first Poincaré theorem, it's a theorem which allows to define the Euler-Poincaré characteristic. Euler characteristic was number of vertices minus the number of segments plus the number of faces equal to. Now we will take any triangulable topological space, any triangulation of this topological space, for example, for the sphere, you take any of this triangulation, and you count the number of I-dimensional simplexes, you call Ki, and you take the alternating sum of this Ki. So, like K0 minus K1 plus K2 for the triangulations of the sphere. And you know that for any triangulation of the sphere, K0 minus K1 plus K2 equal 2. So it is independent of the choice of the triangulation. And in fact, Poincaré shown that this is true for any triangulable topologic space, finite. And so this justifies the definition, the Euler-Poincaré characteristic of a finite dimensional, n-dimensional triangulable topologic space is K of X is alternating sum of this Ki. Okay, and it does not depend on the triangulation. That is a very good theorem of Poincaré, generalizing what we were knowing for the sphere. Okay. Oh my God, we were in the Eiffel Tower, and we are now in underground of Paris. And just at that time, it is the construction of the first metro line. Here you see the guy who was engineer for this metro line. His name is Bienvenu. Maybe if you go to Paris, you will see there is a metro station called Bienvenu. And so this is the first metro line in Paris, just to situate you in time of all these mathematical results. Well, so Poincaré was already looking at singular spaces, and singular spaces like pseudo-manifold. Pseudo-manifold is a polyhedron which does not give a manifold like the sphere or like the torus, but which provide an example which will be the pinched torus. The pinched torus is not a manifold, it's not smooth, because you have this vertex of the pinched torus, which is a singular point. Why is it a singular point? Because there is no neighborhood of this point in the pinched torus, which is like a disk. If you take any other point of the pinched torus, they have a neighborhood which is a disk, but the vertex, the point A or alpha, I think I gave the name, is a singular point. Well, so this will be a pseudo-manifold. What is a pseudo-manifold? It's a dimension n that says that the maximum dimension of the simplex is n. Each simplex is face of an n simplex. Okay, so there is a mistake here, n. And each n minus 1 simplex, so one less than the maximal dimension, is face of exactly 2 n simplices. For example, you cannot have a segment and 3 plane going to the segment. Okay, this is not possible. So this condition here is very important. We will see why. And if the set of n and n-1 simplexes is connected, this is additional condition. We say that this is simple pseudo-manifold. Now let me define orientation of this pseudo-manifold. An orientation of a simplex is an equivalence class of order of its vertices. You know very well you have a triangle, x0, x1, x0, x1, x2, and you can define an order, and any order in will be either the same than the one you have chosen at the beginning, or the contrary. And you have two classes, you have two orientations. The simplex has two possible orientations. And it's clear also that an orientation of an n simplex induces an orientation on each of the faces. This is very easy to see that. If you take, for example, this picture here, I have A0, A1, A2 that I oriented in that sense, A0, A1, A2. And this gives an orientation A1, A2 on the face, on this face, okay? And this gives orientation A2, A0 on this face here, okay? So an orientation of an n simplex induces an orientation on each of its faces. We say now that orientation of two simplexes and any dimension, two simplexes which are a common side here, a common side face, A1, A2. These two simplexes have compatible orientations if the orientation induced on the common face are opposite. For example, here, A0, A1, A2 gives this orientation of A1, A2. But you see that orientation, if you want the same orientation, for this triangle, like this, okay, orientation like this, then you see that it will give A1, B0, A2 as an orientation of this simplex, and A2, A1 as opposite orientation than in the first simplex. Okay, so this is easy to understand, and I think maybe you already know that. Well, so we will say that a simple n pseudomanifold is orientable if there exists a triangulation of this pseudomanifold such that you can define a compatible orientation for all n simplexes, which are the maximum dimension simplexes on this pseudomanifold. Here are some examples of for manifolds, because the torus, projective plane, and Klein bottle are manifolds, smooth. And you can see that we will define now orientation for this manifold. For the torus, it is easy to define orientation such that if you take orientation of a simplex, then all simplexes will be oriented in the same way, without any problem. If you take the projective plane, that's an exercise for you. Take the projective plane. Take, for example, this triangle here, this triangle, and give an orientation on this triangle, okay? If I go here to this triangle, orientation of this triangle will induce here, will induce here, and will induce here, okay? So starting from this one, I will call sigma, I have a triangle, I have an orientation on sigma prime, this one, okay? So now, instead of going directly, you go on the right. So you have this, you have this, you have this, and you have orientation on F going like this. So now you have orientation on F. F is here, and you respect to have in the contrary orientation. So you will have to go in the contrary side, okay? So that F has opposite orientation here and here. So now you are like this. and you continue like this, and you continue like this, and you arrive in sigma prime with the opposite orientation of the one you had going directly. So it is impossible to provide the same orientation for all simplexes on the projective plane. The projective plane is a non-orientable manifold. You can exercise to the same for the Klein bottle. You will see that you know that the Klein bottle is not orientable. But if you take the pitched torus, sorry, I come back to the pitched torus. Where is my pitched torus? Here. It's possible to define compatible orientation on all triangles of this triangulation of the pitched torus. So pitched torus is an orientable pseudo-manifold. But it's not a manifold. This point here is a singular point, okay? Well, so now if I have the torus, for example, as I said, you can define a compatible orientation for all n-dimensional, here is two-dimensional, simplexes of the torus, compatible orientation. If you take the sum of this guy, what is the boundary? The boundary of this triangle will be like this. And the boundary of this one will have opposite orientation on the common face. So taking the boundary of this one plus the boundary of this one, this face here, common face, disappear because it has a sign plus for one and minus for the other. And the same for all one-dimensional simplexes, because each n-1 simplex is face of exactly two n-dimensional simplexes, okay? So that is true not only for manifold, like in this picture, but also for pseudo-manifold. The boundary of the chain, which is the sum of all n-dimensional simplexes, is 0. So this chain, the sum of all n-dimensional simplexes with the common orientation, is a cycle. And this cycle is called the fundamental cycle or orientation cycle. It is because you have chosen an orientation which is the same for all n-dimensional simplexes. Okay, so this cycle in homology gives a class which is the fundamental class or orientation class. I will say, I think, or fundamental class. And this class is in dimension n because you have all n-dimensional simplexes. So here the n-dimensional homology class is Z with one generator, which is the fundamental class. And in the case of non-orientable, this sum of all n-1, you cannot do that because you can take the sum, but it's not a cycle because you have seen that if you take the turn, you have in the opposite side. What does it mean? It means that some boundary, some segments will be counted twice. So it's not a cycle. The boundary is not 0. So you have no fundamental cycle in the non-orientable case, and the homology in dimension n of a non-orientable pseudo-manifold is 0. For examples, the pitched torus is an orientable, I will say, pseudo-manifold. The fundamental class is the sum of all two-dimensional simplexes with coherent orientation, and homology is Z. The same for the sphere, the same for the torus. But the two projective planes here and the Klein bottle here are non-orientable, so homology in dimension 2 of the two projective space and the Klein bottle is 0. Okay? Well, so now we go to dual cells. So we take now a triangulated manifold. And we will define a dual cell decomposition, which is the way Poincaré define Poincaré duality. I know that there are now people who describes, who defines the Poincaré duality is a more axiomatic way, I will say. But here it will be useful even for studying characteristic classes to look at the way Poincaré defined the Poincaré duality using dual cell decomposition. So how do you, I will take a picture which is easier for you. So I take a triangulation, which is a blue. For the moment, look at the blue. The blue is a triangulation of your manifold. And you define a barycentric subdivision. What does it mean? It means that for each segment, you choose a point, any point. It's not necessarily the middle. And you decide that is the barycenter of your segment, sigma hat 1, barycenter of sigma 1. The same for a triangle, two-dimensional simplex, and you decide that this point, in the interior, of course, not on the boundary, on the interior, this point is the barycenter of sigma 2. So this point is sigma hat 2, which is A prime also. And for a segment, you have here. For a triangle, you have here. And a vertex is its own barycenter, of course. So for sigma 0 hat is the point sigma 0. Okay. So now, if I take this segment sigma 1 with this barycenter sigma hat 1, I will consider all simplices of the barycentric subdivision. I did not say, but it's clear that you have the barycentric subdivision gives you a triangulation, which is finer than the previous one. So you have here segments in the barycentric subdivisions, for example, sigma hat 2 to B, sigma hat 2 to C. There are one-dimensional simplex in the barycentric subdivision. And you have also vertices, which are, for example, which all vertices in this barycentric subdivision are barycenter of some simplex. This is barycenter of the two-dimensional simplex. This guy is barycenter of BC, okay? And here you have a barycenter of AC, okay? So what I will do, taking a segment sigma 1, I will look at all simplices in this barycentric subdivision such that the intersection with sigma 1 is exactly the barycenter of sigma 1. For example, sigma hat 1 B prime is a segment, is a one-dimensional simplex in the barycentric subdivision, and the intersection with sigma 1 is just one point. The same for this one. If you take this triangle sigma 0 hat, sigma 1 hat, sigma 2 hat, this is a triangle in the barycentric subdivision, a two-dimensional simplex, and the intersection with sigma 1 is this one-dimensional simplex in the barycentric subdivision. So, not good. I don't take it. I take only those such that the intersection with sigma 1 is exactly the barycenter of sigma 1. And this I call the dual cell. In a manifold, the dual cell is a cell, a true cell, like a ball. So the boundary is here 2 points, and 2 points is the sphere, dimension 0 sphere, okay? Well, so let's go further, and I will look at now what is the dual cell of this point, sigma 0, which is just a vertex of my initial triangulation, okay? And also a vertex in the barycentric subdivision. And I take all simplices in the barycentric subdivision whose intersection with sigma 1 is exactly the barycenter sigma 1 hat. Of course, this triangle is okay. The intersection with sigma 1 is this point. This triangle also, etc., etc. So all these triangles are okay. So the dual cell of this point, of this zero-dimensional vertex in the previous triangulation, is a cell, is well a ball, okay? Now homeomorphic to a ball, and which is two-dimensional. This is very important, is that the dimension of the dual cell will be complementary of the dimension of the simplex you start. For example, if I take sigma hat 0, the dual cell, which is zero-dimensional, the dual cell is two-dimensional. If I take sigma 1 as a simplex, what is the dual cell of sigma 1? Is A prime, sigma hat 1, B prime. This is not one-dimensional, it is 2 minus 1 dimensional. Okay, it is complementary dimensional. It has not the same dimensions as sigma 1. It has complementary dimension. And now, if I take a triangle, so we know what happens with a vertex, you know what happens with a segment, what happens with a triangle with a two-dimensional simplex. If I take this one, maybe I will return, it will be easier here. If I take this triangle, this two-dimensional simplex ABC, okay, and I look at all simplexes in the barycentric subdivision whose intersection with sigma hat 2 is exactly sigma hat 2. And I see that, you see that this one, the intersection with a triangle, is more than sigma hat 2, it is all this. Maybe I made a mistake. I have to look at all simplexes in the barycentric subdivision whose intersection with ABC, with the triangle, is exactly the barycentric of this triangle, sigma hat 2, okay? No, I think I made a mistake. So what are all these simplexes in the barycentric subdivision whose intersection with the triangle ABC is exactly the barycenter? You see that there is only one, which is the barycenter itself. Okay, so the dual cell of ABC is a point, is a zero-dimensional cell, okay? Well, so it is well complementary dimensional. Of course, here I gave you the example with dimension 2, but you can do in dimension 3 by yourself. It's very interesting to try to see how in three-dimensional space, if you take a triangulation of the three-dimensional space, if you take a segment, the dual will be a two-dimensional cell which meet the segment only at the barycenter of this segment. And if you take a triangle, okay, a triangle, the dual cell will be just one-dimensional and transversal to this triangle, okay, and passing through the barycenter of the triangle. So you can do it by yourself. It's very easy to do so. So dual cells, I think it's quite easy to understand. And so now we have, you see that taking all dual cells, you will recover the space. So the dual cell, so you obtain what is called the dual cell decomposition of the space associated to the barycentric subdivision of K. Of course, if you change the barycenter, you can take another barycenter for sigma 1, that point, and that point, etc. So you will have another dual cell decomposition, but you feel certainly that they are homeomorphic, the both dual cell decompositions. In fact, we have what is called the CW complex. I will not use too much CW complex, but if you know already the definition of this, what is a CW complex on a manifold? It's a decomposition, it's a partition in open cells, such that each cell is homeomorphic to a ball, that is this here, and the boundary is union of finite number of cells with less dimensional. You see very well here, and already you see the theorem will come, that what is the boundary of this two-dimensional cell? I have this, which is the dual cell of sigma 1, and I have this here, oh sorry, this here, no I cannot do. I have this here, which is the dual cell of AD. I have this here, okay, which is the dual cell of this one, no name. Then this, the dual cell of this, and then this, which is the dual cell of AC. So you see what results that we will see later, that the boundary, oh, maybe I can show you here already. No, later. Okay, so the boundary of the cell is here. The boundary of the cell is, which is dual of A, is composed of cells which are dual of all these segments arriving to A. Okay, so we will see that later in a better way. Okay, so now, first of all, I want to give an orientation to the dual cell. If I orient sigma 1 like this, of course, K as the starting point, in K, you have oriented all simplices, any dimension, or they are all oriented, even, for example, sigma 1. What is the orientation I will give to the dual cell of sigma 1? I will give the orientation such that orientation of the dual cell followed by the one of sigma 1 gives orientation of the manifold. So I have to work with oriented manifold, okay? So if I suppose M oriented, all simplices are given a compatible orientation. This is very important because M is oriented, we have seen that. But you give arbitrary orientation for the n-1 and n-2, etc. Simplices in K. And you give orientation to the dual cell such that orientation of the dual cell followed by orientation of sigma is the orientation of N. For example, here, sigma 1 is oriented like this. Orientation of all two-dimensional simplexes is this one. Okay, the contrary, the positive one in physics, which is the contrary of the clock. Okay, all two-dimensional are oriented like that. And what is the orientation I will give to the dual cell of sigma 1? I will give orientation such that orientation of D of sigma 1 followed by orientation of sigma 1 gives this orientation. And you see very well that if I give this orientation like this, and then I go up to the orientation of sigma 1, I will go in the good orientation sign, okay? Well, so this is very important. So you can define orientation of the dual cells. Well, and now I will define the co-boundary. The co-boundary will allow to compute cohomology, okay? Instead of homology, you take the boundary of the simplex, of the chains, and now we will go to co-boundary. And the co-boundary of a cochain, in fact, we will look at cells are elementary cochains, and the co-boundary of a cell will be the sum of one-dimensional more P, here is P plus 1, cells one dimension more, and with a sign plus or minus. And the sign plus or minus will be plus if the orientation of the cell C plus 1 as in its boundary, CP with the same orientation of the boundary, and minus in other way. Look at here. I have this D of sigma 1, which is a cell. So I look at D of sigma 1 as a cochain. Okay? Each dual cell I look at as a cochain. and I have to take, so this is CP, okay? And I have to take the commonary. I define the commonary. What is the commonary of D of sigma 1? The commonary of this cell, I have to look at all +1 cells. So here 1 cochain. So I have to take the two-dimensional cochain, the two-dimensional cells, such that C, D of sigma 1, is in the boundary of them. So D of sigma 1 is in the boundary of D of B and also in the boundary of D of A. So the co-boundary of D of sigma 1 will be D of B and D of A, but with a sign, plus or minus. And I have to look at, is D of sigma 1 with the same orientation that the boundary of D of B, and same question for D of A. You see very well that orientation of every two-dimensional things are like that. So D of B has this orientation turning like that. And you see very well that D of sigma 1 has a good orientation for D of B. Is it clear? The orientation of D of B is, I think it's very clear. It's like this. D of sigma 1 has the orientation, has a good orientation as a boundary of D of B. And I look at D of A and I turn like this and I see, oh, D of sigma 1 has a contrary orientation as the boundary of D of A. Okay, the orientation I gave to D of sigma 1 is the opposite orientation as the boundary of D of A. So the co-boundary of sigma 1 will be, and the co-boundary of the dual cell D sigma 1 is D of B minus D of A. Okay, so the co-boundary of a cell is a sum, algebraic sum of one-dimensional more cells which contain these cells in their boundary with a sign plus or minus depending if the CP appears in the boundary of the one-dimensional more chain as the orientation of the boundary or not. Okay, I think this example is clear, sufficiently clear to understand what happened. So you can define in general the co-chain, which are I indicated with D, meaning that it's taking the dual cells, okay, taking the dual cells. So you take here, what are elements here are sum, algebraic sum of p-dimensional cells. And the co-boundary gives you p plus one-dimensional chain. And also, of course, if you start with p minus 1, you will go like this to CP. So the co-boundary operation is like that. And you can define co-cycles. Co-cycles are elements in CP whose co-boundary is 0. Okay, elements here whose co-boundary is 0. And so these are the co-cycle, and the co-boundary as are people in CP, which are co-boundary of somebody. Okay, which are co-boundary of somebody of dimension p minus 1. Okay, so you see that the co-boundary gives one dimension more. So it's the contrary of boundary. And you can define the cohomology groups, which are the quotient of co-boundary of the co-cycles, by co-boundary. Okay. Well, I will give you some examples. This first example, we take the torus. We take the torus and we have here sigma 1, sigma 2, sigma 3. So this is a chain. Sigma 1 plus sigma 2 plus sigma 3 is a chain. It is a cycle, because the boundary is 0. Okay, and it is not a boundary. It is not a boundary of somebody. If it is boundary for, if you take boundary, for example, here, so you will have to take this one, and it's a full torus. So it's not good. So sigma is a cycle and it is not a boundary. We look at the dual. The dual of sigma 1 is D of sigma 1 here. It's clear? I think now it's clear for you. Okay? The dual of sigma 2 is this, D of sigma 2. And the dual of sigma 3 is this, D of sigma 3. So the dual of the chain sigma is the chain d of the cochain, sorry, d of sigma 1 plus d of sigma 2 plus d of sigma 3, which is a cochain. Is this cochain a cocycle? We will see. It is a cocycle if the co-boundary gives 0. So what is the co-boundary, for example, of d of sigma 2? The co-boundary of d of sigma 2 is taking this orientation of the torus. So the dual cell of P, which is one more dimensional, is oriented like that. The dual cell of Q, of the vertex Q, is two-dimensional, oriented like that. So what is the co-boundary of d of sigma 2? It is a sum with the sign of this plus this. And you see that the orientation of the boundary of P coincides with the orientation of d of sigma 2. And the co-boundary of Q, okay, the boundary of Q is going like that in that sense, so it's opposite. So the co-boundary of d of sigma 2 is d of P minus d of Q. And if you continue, the co-boundary of sigma 3 will be d of R, you see R here. So d of R has a part here and a part here. So the co-boundary of d of sigma 3 is the co-boundary of R minus co-boundary of 3, which is now opposite. So d of P will disappear when you take the sum. The same, d of Q will disappear and d of R will disappear. So the co-boundary of d of sigma 1 plus d of sigma 2 plus d of sigma 3 is 0. What does it mean? It means that if the co-boundary is 0, it means that it is an element of the nucleus of the kernel, which is a cocycle. Okay? So the red cochain, d of sigma 1 plus d of sigma 2 plus d of sigma 3 is a cocycle. And it is not a co-boundary. That is easy. I let for you as an exercise. It's very easy to see that. So for the torus, you have also in the other sense, it's clear, I think, for you. You will have this green chain, τ1 plus τ2 plus τ3, which will give the same result. The green chain is a cycle, it's not a boundary. And the green, I did not put you here, but the dual chain, the dual cochain of τ1 plus τ2 plus τ3, which is d of τ1 plus d of τ2 plus d of τ3, is a cocycle and it's not a co-boundary. What does it mean? It means that homology of the torus, it's easy to, of course, we did not give all the proof, but is generated by two cycles, sigma and 2. I think this you know already. Okay. Homology of H1 of the torus is Z plus Z. And the same for the cohomology with the dual, which are cocycle, d of sigma and d of 2, which are cocycle and not co-boundary. Let's go to a singular variety because we want to work also with singular varieties. And the Pichet torus is the best to do that. And so I will think, okay, I will take the same than for the torus, and I will look at what appears. What appears? The chain sigma 1 plus sigma 2 plus sigma 3 is a cycle, but now in the torus it was not a boundary, but now this blue chain sigma is the boundary of this cone here, this region G, which is the gray region A here. Okay, so sigma is a cycle, but it is also a boundary. So when you take the homology of the Pichet torus, that will be 0 because boundaries disappear in homology. Okay, but look at the dual of sigma, which is exactly like in the torus. On the situation, we don't go till the singular point. We are exactly in the same situation than in the torus for this part. So the dual cell, d sigma 1 plus d sigma 2 plus d sigma 3, gives a co-cycle, d of sigma 1 plus d of sigma 2 plus d of sigma 3, which is not a co-boundary like in the torus, because this part is exactly like in the torus. So the dual of sigma is not a co-boundary. So it gives a generator in cohomology. And that is very important, that for this singular variety, you see the difference which appear, that in homology, this cycle is a boundary gives 0, and its dual, d of sigma 1 plus d of sigma 2 plus d of sigma 3, is a co-cycle, and it is not a co-boundary, so it does not give 0 in cohomology. Look at the second one. Look at the second one here. Okay, I think you can see on the torus, the green is something like that. I did not picture, but it's easy to see that. Tau1 plus Tau2 plus Tau3. This is a cycle. It's well a cycle. If you picture here this green chain, it is a cycle. And it is not a boundary, like in the torus. No more. So this Tau is a cycle, which is not a boundary, so it does not give 0 in homology, it gives a generator in homology, okay? Look at the dual. Dual of Tau1 plus dual of Tau2 plus dual of Tau3. Now we have a problem, because, of course, here is the same than in the torus, okay? The dual of Tau1, the co-boundary is this minus this, okay? But here now, the dual of this will be this part, the part here, when is this? And this does not appear because you are on the two opposite sides of A, okay? So the co-boundary here, if you take the co-boundary of this co-cycle here, it does not, this is not a co-cycle because the co-boundary is not 0. It's not a co-cycle at all. So the dual of Tau is not a co-cycle. Tau is a cycle which is not a boundary. It gives something in homology, and its dual is not a co-cycle. So it does not give anything in cohomology. So that is very interesting, that homology of the torus is given by Tau, and the cohomology is given by the dual of sigma. Okay, so that is very interesting, that here you can think that this is isomorphism. Not at all. Not all maps from Z to Z are isomorphism. We will see that. Okay, so what I just give is you take a sigma, you take a cycle here, you take a chain here, even a chain, and you take the dual chain. And if you have a compact oriented n-dimensional manifold, then this is a small exercise for you. It's easy to see that if you take sigma 1, we have seen that the boundary of, what is the boundary of sigma 1? It is B minus A, because you have this orientation. So orientation of this one-dimensional simplex is B minus A. Okay, so the boundary of is B minus A. What is the dual of the boundary of sigma? The dual of the boundary of sigma is B minus A. The dual is D of B minus D of A, okay? Now look at what is the dual of the one-dimensional simplex sigma 1. The dual of sigma 1 is this alpha, beta, D of sigma 1, okay? It is a cell, one-dimensional cell. We have seen that. And what is the co-boundary of this cell? We have seen that it is D of B minus D of A. And this is the results I already told you, but then you can see on this picture that the dual of the boundary is the same as the co-boundary of the dual. The dual of the boundary, you take the boundary and the dual. And this is the co-boundary of the dual. You take the dual and the co-boundary. And this diagram commutes. And we have isomorphism at each horizontal stage, which gives an isomorphism between cohomology in dimension n minus I and homology in complementary dimension. That is exactly the Poincaré duality, the Poincaré isomorphism. This is obtained by duality. Okay, and so, and this in that sense is a D, we have seen, and in the other sense is a cap product with the fundamental class. We have seen the fundamental class before. So capping with the fundamental class goes, which is n-dimensional, so gives you n minus I, so it is I-dimensional. Okay, so you have an isomorphism, Poincaré isomorphism, which is well described. Now I can, we can see the first picture torus, sorry, it's always that there. And picture torus arrives always, even when I don't wait for him. So picture torus comes now. And he said, yes, but I have also Z and Z. So I have also isomorphism between them. Not at all, picture torus. Because here, homology has tau. And what is the image of tau? The image of tau is D of tau, which does not give anything in cohomology. And here you have the dual of sigma, but sigma here does not exist in homology, and the dual of sigma. So what does it mean? It means that this map here sends everybody on zero. Okay, it is absolutely not an isomorphism, neither injective nor surjective. Okay, take care, all maps Z to Z are not isomorphism. Well, okay. So for the picture torus, this map is zero, and this is very important. So as an exercise, you can do exactly the contrary of what I did. In fact, I choose this way to give you Poincaré isomorphism because it will be exactly the way we will use in for the characteristic classes, and that is interesting for you on this sense. Okay. So as an exercise, you can write all what I did, but on the contrary, you will consider the triangulation K. You will consider the simplex of K as being co-cycle, co-chain, co-cycle, and the dual cell will be chains on cycle. So if you have a sigma 1, you consider sigma 1 as a co-chain, and okay, and the dual, so the dual will be alternate sum of the two-dimensional simplices which are here, which have in common phase sigma 1, and the dual chain will be now cycles. So I am not obliged here to take D and K. There is K because I look at I simplices of K and the dual which is in D, and you make exactly the contrary. Here K and here will be D, and you will see that you obtain in the same way a Poincaré duality. In fact, it's more Poincaré duality. Poincaré used in this one, but for characteristic classes we will use exactly as I told you. Oh, sorry, there is a E that I have no baguette magic to kill the E, but you can kill the E, which is here. Okay, now we are in 1885 and Victor Hugo dead. I know in Brazil, many people called Victor Hugo, so I think it's interesting to know that the funerals of Victor Hugo was national funerals in Creole, more than 1 million. Some people say 2 million of persons, more than the funerals of Johnny Hallyday. And it was full. And it was even some people, they rented a place at the first in their building to be able to see the funerals. And Victor Hugo said that he did not want a car for going for the funerals, but this is horse cab for funerals. So, and so at that time, Poincaré was there. So I don't know. I tried to see where is Poincaré, but I did not see. Maybe you can do, but I go to Poincaré. To Poincaré of theorem, which is exactly Poincaré did the year of Victor Hugo funeral, so it's a reason for which I put this, and of later on in more general, and of more general situation. Okay, so Poincaré did for surfaces, and Hopf did for more general for any manifold of any dimension. But they consider, Poincaré consider surfaces without boundary for Poincaré, but after that it was generalized with boundary. And Hopf consider compact manifold, any dimension, with boundary. And you take, certainly you know already this result, you take V, a continuous vector field, and you, with this isolated singularity in M is compact, so there is a finite number of singularities, you know that. And you know that if M has no boundary, then characteristic, Euler characteristic, Euler Poincaré characteristic, because it's any dimension, of M is the sum of indices of the vector field at the isolated singular points. And if there is a boundary, either V is pointing outwards of M along the boundary and you have the same formula. But if V is pointing inwards, you have this formula. In fact, maybe you know already this formula, but I will give you a proof because in the singular case, this does not work like it is written. And you have to take care of some things. And so it is interesting to see, even if you know already this, the proof of this, as I will give you by obstruction theory, because we will use for singular varieties and for singular characteristic classes as well. Okay, so of course the main consequence of this is the sum of indices does not depend of the vector field. As soon as it is a continuous, I don't know if I say that, but continuous vector field tangent to the compact manifold. Of course, there are generalizations with non-isolated singularity, but I will look at isolated singularity in this course. And the Euler-Poincaré characteristic is, in fact, this is the most important. The Euler-Poincaré characteristic is a measure of the obstruction to construct a tangent vector field to the manifold, continuous tangent vector field to the manifold. This is a measure of the obstruction. If this obstruction, if chi of M is 0, then you can construct a vector field without any singularity. So chi of M, this Euler-Poincaré characteristic, this is the most important in this course, is a measure of the obstruction for this construction. And in that sense, Euler-Poincaré characteristic is the first defined characteristic classes. Okay. Well, just I will finish with some notion of index. The tangent bundle to a differentiable manifold of dimension n, you know that the tangent bundle T of M is a real vector bundle of rank n. The rank is the dimension of the fibers, and the fiber is Tx of M, which is isomorphic to Rn. And the vector bundle is locally trivial. That means that you can, for any point in M, you can find a neighborhood U of this point, such that over U, the restriction of the tangent bundle is a product U with the fiber. Okay, so this I think you know. And in the fiber, which is Rn, which is the Euclidean space dimension n, you have a 0, you have the origin of Rn. And so you have what is called a section of this bundle. The section is you associate to any point in M a point in the fiber over M. And you can do that. For the zero section, what does it mean? It means that to any point X in M, you associate the point in the fiber, which is zero in the fiber. Origin of the fiber is Rn, so you have the origin, okay? Well, and I will call T0 of X, this T0 of M, sorry, Tm minus the image of the zero section. And now we will see, I will go here, the most important thing, and please take care of this. This will be a very important picture, not all courses, but quite all courses. We will see for characteristic classes this picture a lot. What is this picture? Let me explain. You are here. I will say n is 2, but you can do for any n. So you have here R2, your plane, okay? And you know that for a point A, any point A, there is a neighborhood, which is this black UA here, such that over UA, the restriction of UA is the product of the basis by the fiber, Rn minus 0, because we take out the zero section, okay? We don't want the vector to be null. Now I take a vector. I take a vector field, which is not 0 here, which has maybe not, which has a singularity at this point. What does it mean? It means that V is 0 at that point. V, the value of V is 0 at that point, okay? But, and I assume that there is no other singular point inside this disk, red disk here, okay? So what does it mean? It means that if I take the tangent plane in any point, for example, x1, I take the tangent plane. In the tangent plane, my vector is not 0, because I will take a vector which is not 0 on the boundary of this disk. The tangent plane, I can look at horizontally, but I can look at also vertically, the same. So this losange here is the same than this square here, okay? This is the tangent plane at x1. And you see that V of x1 is the same here and here, okay? So what I do is looking at each point here, x2, the vector is not 0. So in the tangent plane at this point, V of x2 is like that. It is like that, okay? And I look at what I will call the lift of this segment of circle from x1 to x2. I look at the endpoint of the vectors. So I have the endpoint of x1. Here I have the endpoint of x2. But between x1 and x2, the vector field is continuous. So I can, if I lift each point between x1 and x2, I will obtain here this segment, this part of curve going from V of x1 here to V of x2. Is clear? For each point, I do that. And I have my vector field, which is defined on the sphere, which is in general dimension n-1, okay? And on this sphere, there is no singularity. So this red curve never passed to the point 0. It is the reason for which I can take Rn minus 0, because this red curve never will pass through the 0 origin of the vertical fiber. Is it clear? This is clear. For any point, x3, I lift with V off, and I have this point, which is the final point of V of x3. Okay, so I have a lifting of the sphere as a curve in this space here. But this space is a product, and I can project on the second coordinate of the product. So I have here the projection of my red curve, which is a red curve here in Rn minus 0. And this is very important to understand very well this, because this is the main point to understand characteristic classes. I have now a map from the sphere Sn minus 1, the boundary here, okay, to each point on Sn minus 1, as I associate a point here through taking V of this point, V of x4, for example. I have this point of the curve, and this point will project here, okay? So I have a map going from the sphere Sn minus 1 to the typical fiber Rn minus 0. Is it clear? This is very, very fundamental. Well, so I have this map from Sn minus 1 to Rn minus 0. And I have two ways, I will give you two ways to compute the index of this map. And the index of a vector field you know already, but it will be an exercise for you to see that the definition I give, maybe you know already, but the definition I give are the same that you know. So first of all, each time you have a map from a sphere, sorry, I want one is a sphere, I cannot make it. Yeah, you have a map from the sphere to a space, Rn minus 0. Wow, Rn minus 0 only, no, I cannot. So you know that each time you have a map from a sphere to a space, you obtain an element in the homotopy group with the dimension of the sphere, n minus 1, and here is the space, Rn minus 0, okay? Each time you have such a map, you have such an element, lambda of VA, in this homotopy group. And this homotopy group is known to be Z. So what does it mean? It means that each time I have such a map, I have an element in Z. So I have an integer, which is exactly the index of your vector field. Okay? You can look at with vector fields you know, and you will see that. You can see also with the Gauss map, we will use also a lot the Gauss map. And the Gauss map is say, what does it say? It says you take now, not at the arrival here, the arrival point is V of x, in fact. But you divide by the norm. So you have something which is on the sphere as well, because you divide by the norm, so length is 1. It is exactly as if in this picture, you take the image of this curve, red curve, on the cycle, which is with the radius 1 in Ln minus 0, okay? Well, so I have a map from Sn minus 1 in Sn minus 1 in Rn minus 0, okay? And so this is a map from Sn minus 1 to Sn minus 1. If you take homology, n minus 1, you know that h minus 1 homology of Sn minus 1 is Z as well, Z. And so you have here a map from Z to Z. You know that sometimes it's isomorphism, sometimes not. And here, this map, in this case of your vector field, it's exactly multiplication by the index. So if the index is 0, it will be 0. If the index is 2, this map will be multiplication by 2, okay? And of course, this index, certainly you did already know. But before finishing, just saying one last thing, that you have a map from Sn minus 1 to Rn minus 0, okay? So you have a map from the boundary of A to a space. Here. And you know by homotopy theory that if this map here gives 0 as an element in the homotopy group, if this map gives 0 in the homotopy group, what does it mean? it means that you can fill all the ball without any singularity because you are in Rn minus 0. It means that your vector field, which is defined on the boundary here of the ball B of A, which is here a disk, in fact, if you obtain 0 when you take the homotopy group or homology group as you wish, but you have an index which is integer, and if this integer is 0 here, that means that you can fill the ball with the vector v without any singularity. Okay, that is very important, and I think it's clear that is basic theory, and this is the basis also of obstruction theory. You can, as an exercise, look at the indices of that you know very well, certainly, and verify that you obtain exactly the indices, which are the one you know. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for this taking this course, and Fikemben. Thank you.